It's been an extraordinary week in politics, which culminated in John Major, the former Prime Minister, branding the government as politically corrupt. Do you agree with him?
Well, yes. I think what we've had this week is an extraordinary sequence of events in which the government, who should have been leaving a House matter to the House, normally should not be whipping for an amendment, a backbench amendment, which was effectively driving a coach and horses through the process whilst a live case is going on. It was a live case that had been properly independently investigated, that investigation reviewed in a sort of an appeals process as it is, with the Standards Committee looking at all the evidence, taking new evidence, reading character witnesses, hearing from Mr. Owen Patterson himself. That had all taken place. They put their motion to the House, and instead the government decided to back a backbench amendment, driving, as I said, a coach many, many horses through that. That's really problematic. And as if that weren't enough, having voted that through with a lot of very, very unhappy Tory MPs, rightly so, they should be unhappy. It's embarrassing when Tory MPs are rounded up to back a Tory MP who's been found to do wrong and found to provide a large amount of access for a very large amount of cash. They then do a U-turn with absolutely no shame. They dump him at the first sign of trouble, and they still have left us in complete chaos. We still don't know where we are, with rumours that he's going to be promoted to a peerage, which I think they should call out. The motion that they passed on Wednesday, narrowly, but it's still there, it still stands. Where's the motion to rescind? There's all sorts of chaos, which all stems, I'm afraid to say, Caroline, from yet more Tory sleaze.
Who do you blame for last week's shambles? Do you think Jacob Rees-Mogg should resign?
Well, I've said earlier today that I think his position is pretty difficult, considering that he's the one who lays motions. He's the one who sets the parliamentary timetable. He claimed in the debate on Wednesday, extraordinarily, that this was a necessary thing to tidy up when he's had any amount of time. Every week, he stands up, opposed by me on the Thursday morning, to announce the business of the House. He could have laid a motion at any point, or brought about a debate, or initiated a discussion. He did none of those things. And I think it's extraordinary that then he U-turned the next day and by saying that it was unfortunate that the two issues, Owen Patterson and possible changes, had been conflated. They were literally conflated by him, and I said so at the time.
But should he resign?
Nobody can pretend they weren't warned. Well, I think that's up to him. I mean, I think calls for resignations never really get us very far. I personally think a man of honour should consider whether or not they are fit to carry on doing something when they've so obviously mangled their own job. But that's up to him. That's a matter for him. I think that, you know, when it comes to who would make the better government, obviously I think the Labour Party would. But at the moment, where we are is we've got a leader of the House who doesn't seem to know how to lay the business of the House, literally his job, and who contradicts himself within less than 24 hours without any sign of shame or embarrassment, which I do find puzzling.
But doesn't the buck stop with the Prime Minister here? We know that when these decisions about whipping are made, I mean, it comes from the top. I mean, you can't say that it's the Chief Whip or even the Leader of the Commons who are actually dictating these decisions. Doesn't this all come down to a judgment call by the Prime Minister?
Well, absolutely. I'm glad you've asked me, because yes, it does. I mean, that's where I start with feeling really sort of slightly despairing, but also very angry on behalf of the British people. This is deeply un-British to not play by the rules. But to have a Prime Minister, in contrast to other Prime Ministers who, when their MPs have been found doing wrongdoing, deal with it, this Prime Minister just tries to find ways to let them off and change the rules. This Prime Minister has got form, however. I'm afraid to say this Tory Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has got a pattern of behaviour that really troubles me. You know, starting with, he'd barely been in post a few minutes before he decided to prorogue Parliament illegally, and it continues from there. He's let off minister after minister who's been found to do wrong, and this is what he tried to do last week. It's completely dishonourable. Yes, it comes from the top. He sets the tone, and I wonder how many Tory MPs are actually approaching the backbench committee, the 1922 committee, and saying, we've got a problem here. If I were them, I would be. It's up to them, but I hear that there's a lot of disquiet in the Tory ranks, and understandably so, there should be.
So what's Labour going to do to clean up politics?
Right. Well, obviously, if we were in government right now, we wouldn't have tried to amend that motion last week. We would have respected the standards motion. I'm calling now, and I have done since then, for Jacob Rees-Mogg to bring a motion to rescind last week's motion to start to clean up the mess. Labour wants the Tory Prime Minister to rule out right now any possibility of Owen Patterson getting a peerage. That would be completely wrong. And Keir Starmer, as Labour Prime Minister, would institute an anti-corruption unit with real powers, real teeth, to make sure that we got the system with real bite. It's also the case that the process itself is always under review, as it should be. I think you just mentioned, Caroline, and I think I saw it in your article this morning, that the Commissioner on Standards in Public Life published just last week a review calling for the system to be strengthened. And since 1695, we've only ever strengthened it. So it is extraordinary that this Prime Minister tried to weaken it. A Labour Prime Minister would do nothing to weaken it. We would only strengthen it, and we would add extra teeth where it needed it. We would also respect the independence of the Commissioner and the cross-party membership of the Committee on Standards, which also has representation from lay people, as we've heard over the course of the last 24 hours, I think, several people sort of speaking about how the public is part of this. And a Labour Prime Minister would respect that and would support that. I'm waiting now. I've spoken to my friend Chris Bryant, who's chair of the Standards Committee. They are reviewing the Code of Conduct at the moment. They're also doing a lessons learned review. They'll be meeting on Tuesday. They will be reporting before Christmas. I would like us to read carefully, and that would be a good thing if people would read reports carefully, what they come up with. And I think out of that, we'll get some really good proposals.
Just on second jobs, we've just heard the Environment Secretary talking about this particular sort of grey area where your party's previously promised to stop MPs taking outside employment in a bid to sort of clean up politics. Is this a position you still stand by?
I think we're all in favour of making sure that nobody really should have paid directorships or consultancies, which actually put them in a compromised position when they then try to gain access to government, as Mr. Owen Patterson did. I don't think many people would seriously want Rosanna Allen Khan, for instance, to stop doing, shift work as a doctor to help out her local hospital, or those MPs who are members of the Territorial Army being available to serve when necessary. I think it is something that needs to be looked at. I really hope we do. I think Labour policy has been really strong on this. In fact, Ed Miliband put forward a motion in 2015, which the government actually, I'm afraid to say, voted down, about banning these paid directorships. They're the ones that cause us problem here. Rosanna helping out at her local hospital, that doesn't cause a conflict of interest. That's public service.
It seems it's not just the House of Commons making headlines for all the wrong reasons today. We've got the story again in the Sunday Times about the fact that there seems to be a pattern of behaviour that if you pay £3 million to the Conservative Party and spend a period of time in the Treasurer's office, then you tend to get offered a peerage. In fact, 16 of those people that held those positions, those top positions as treasurers in the party, are now elevated and sitting in the House of Lords. What do you make of that, and what needs to be done there?
Well, I mean, it's outrageous because this ends up, you end up the day, and my colleague Angela Rayner, Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, has taken this one up, and rightly so. You end up thinking, well, if it looks like corruption, it smells like corruption, and it's behaving like corruption, it probably is. And I think that it's really reprehensible that what we've got is a pattern here, as I said, a pattern where if you're Tory party treasurer or a big donor, you get a peerage. If you are a mate of the Prime Minister's, you get let off the rules, or the Prime Minister tries to get you off the rules when you've been found bank rights taking a large amount of money for a large amount of access. This is problematic. And that's a real difference between the Labour Party and the Tory party, is when things go wrong, we try to fix them. We hold up our hands and try and make them right. The Tory party, I'm afraid to say, just tries to cover it up and just give the people benefiting it even more benefit.